The Galactic Culinary Summit gleamed like a jewel box of 1,000 worlds, where elite chefs presented dishes that bent physics and rewrote flavor itself. But in the back kitchen, a single human father worked the fryer with hands scarred by oil and time, until the High Chancellor's daughter refused every dish presented to her and wandered into the service corridor, trembling and afraid. What the human did next would change not just her palate, but the future of two civilizations. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. The Galactic Culinary Summit rose above the crystalline waters of Viridian Prime like a crown of light and glass. 50 stories of transparent walls reflected the twin moons, while inside, the galaxy's greatest chefs conjured miracles from flame and frost. Dishes floated on magnetic fields. Soups sang in harmonic frequencies. Desserts bloomed like flowers made of stars. Delegates from 900 systems gathered in tiered galleries, their jeweled robes catching light like promises kept and broken. At the summit's heart, the grand exhibition hall hummed with voices in languages that tasted of copper, honey, and ozone. But below, beneath the marble and the mirrors, the service kitchen stretched long and hot and loud, a place where magic became work and work became invisible. Theo Brennan stood at Station 47, the last fryer in the back corner near the coolant exhaust. His apron, once white, bore the grey shadows of 1,000 shifts. His hands moved with the quiet economy of a man who had learned precision from necessity, not from academies. Sweat beaded along his temple despite the cooling fans, and his shoulders carried the particular stoop of someone who spent years bending over heat. Around him, alien chefs barked orders in clicking tongues and subsonic rumbles. They wore their accolades like armor, medals suspended from crystalline chains, honor marks burned into their exoskeletons. They did not speak to Theo. To them, he was the human fryer, the one who processed the bulk orders, the appetizers no one remembered. Earth had no seat at the summit's high table. Humans cooked, but they did not create. A Vexthari sous chef passed, his 6 arms balancing platters of something that shimmered between liquid and light. He sneered, mandibles clicking in amusement as droplets of Theo's fryer oil spattered near his boots. "Careful, human," he hissed. "Your primitive combustion offends the molecular stations." Theo said nothing. He adjusted the temperature gauge with a thumbnail, rotated the basket, and lifted golden fritters from oil that shimmered at exactly 335 degrees. Not hot enough yet. Not for what he needed. A young Dorvathi prep cook, scales gleaming cobalt in the harsh light, whispered to another near the vegetable synthesizers. "Why do they let him stay? Cheap labor. Humans work for scraps." Both laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of bone. Theo wiped his hands on a towel that smelled of rendered fat and time. He checked his terminal, a scratched tablet showing the order queue. 300 spring rolls for the lower gallery, 600 dumplings for the trade delegation lounge. Nothing that would ever reach the high table, where dishes were plated like art. His daughter's picture sat propped against the backsplash, a small hologram no bigger than his thumb. She smiled in frozen light, her hair in twin braids, her school uniform crisp. 7 years old now, living with her aunt back on Earth because the summit didn't allow families in the service quarters. He sent money home every week, enough to make the oil burns worth it. The kitchen roared around him. A gravity oven malfunctioned, spilling spheres of molten sugar across the tile. Someone activated a cryo beam too close to a heat lamp, and the resulting steam filled the corridor with fog. Theo adjusted his station's ventilation hood, checked his oil temperature again. 338 degrees, closed now, almost ready. He did not know that above him, a young alien girl sat trembling before a table of untouched masterpieces. He did not know that in minutes she would stumble into his corner of the kitchen, shaking and small. He only knew the oil, the heat, the rhythm of work that kept him tethered to a daughter he could not hold. Zira fled the grand exhibition hall with her hands pressed against her throat, her small frame trembling like a leaf caught in a storm. Behind her, the High Chancellor's voice called out in concern, but she could not turn back, could not face the table laden with masterpieces that made her stomach twist with terror. The dishes had been beautiful, crystallized nebulae that sparkled like captured starlight, foam that tasted of distant suns, jellies that shifted color with each breath. But to Zira, they were torture, each one a reminder of the thing she could not escape. Heat, oil, the sizzle that haunted her dreams. She stumbled through a service door that swung open on silent hinges, her vision blurring with tears she refused to shed in front of the delegates. The corridor beyond smelled different, sharp, honest, like something burning that was meant to burn. She pressed her back against the cool metal wall, her chest heaving, her pale blue skin flushed darker with distress. The phobia had started 3 years ago, when she had witnessed a kitchen accident on her homeworld, a pot of boiling oil, a careless servant, screams that echoed through marble halls. She had been too young to understand, but old enough to remember. Now, at 10 years old, she could not eat anything fried, anything that touched hot oil, anything that reminded her of that day. Her father had tried everything. Therapists who spoke in soothing tones, medications that dulled her senses, chefs who prepared dishes in ways that hid the preparation. Nothing worked. The moment she sensed the signature of deep-fried food, her throat closed, her hands shook, and the world became too small to breathe in. The summit was meant to be a celebration, a diplomatic triumph. Instead, it had become her prison. Course after course presented by the galaxy's finest, and she could not swallow a single bite without her body betraying her with panic. She heard voices from deeper in the corridor, rough, working voices that spoke in practical tones about temperatures and timing. She followed the sound, her feet moving without permission, drawn by something she could not name. The service kitchen opened before her like a cavern of fire and steam. Stations stretched in rows, each one a universe of flame and blade. Alien chefs moved with choreographed violence, chopping, searing, plating. And at the far end, in the corner where the light was dimmest and the heat was fiercest, a human man stood before a fryer. He did not notice her. His attention belonged entirely to the oil, to the gauge he adjusted with careful fingers, to the basket he lifted and lowered with the patience of someone who had done this 10,000 times. The smell reached her first. Hot oil, yes, but different somehow. Cleaner, more controlled. She should have run, should have fled back to the galleries where her father waited with worry etched into every line of his face. But something in the way the human moved, the way he touched the equipment like it was a living thing, held her still. She watched, and for the first time in 3 years, she did not immediately turn away from the sight of something frying. She stayed, trembling, curious, afraid but not fleeing. And the human, still unaware, checked his thermometer one more time and whispered to himself a single number. 340. Theo sensed her before he saw her. A shift in the air, a presence too small to be another chef, too quiet to be a supervisor. He turned slowly, spatula still in hand, and found the girl standing at the edge of his station. She was Kirathi, her skin the pale blue of winter ice, her eyes too large and too bright, rimmed with the silver that marked her species' youth. She wore robes that cost more than his year's salary, embroidered with symbols he recognized from the summit's highest galleries. Nobility, perhaps royalty, and she was shaking. He set the spatula down carefully, wiped his hands on his apron, and crouched to bring himself closer to her height. The kitchen chaos roared around them, but he kept his voice low, gentle, the way he spoke to his daughter during thunderstorms. "Hey there. You lost?" She did not answer, her gaze fixed on the fryer behind him, on the oil that shimmered with heat, and her breath came faster, shallower. Theo followed her stare and understood immediately. He had seen fear before, the kind that lived in the body and could not be reasoned with. His daughter had been afraid of the dark once, terrified of shadows that moved wrong. This was the same, but focused on something he held in his hands every day. "You scared of the oil?" he asked. She nodded once, a movement so small it barely registered. Her hands clenched the fabric of her robes, knuckles paling even further. Theo glanced around the kitchen. No one paid attention to them. They never did. He was invisible here, and so, by proximity, was she. He made a decision that would alter everything, though he did not know it yet. "Want me to show you something?" he asked. She did not nod this time, but she did not run either. He took that as permission. He stood slowly, telegraphing every movement, and gestured to the fryer. "This here's got oil at 340 degrees, he said. "Not 350. Not 330. Exactly 340. You know why that matters?" She shook her head, still silent, still trembling. "Because at 340, he continued, "the food doesn't burn. It doesn't soak up grease. It cooks clean. Fast seal, on the outside, perfect inside. Too hot, and it's torture. Too cold, and it's soggy. But 340, that's where the magic lives." He reached for a small piece of vegetable he had prepped earlier, a simple carrot cut thin. He held it up so she could see, then lowered it gently into the oil with a pair of long tongs. The sizzle rose sharp and immediate, and Zira flinched. But Theo did not rush. He kept his movements calm, steady, and after exactly 47 seconds, he lifted the tempura-fried carrot from the oil. It emerged golden, delicate, steam rising like morning mist. He set it on a paper towel to drain, then held it out to her on a small plate. "Not torture," he said quietly. "Just heat that knows its place." She stared at the offering, her fear warring with something else, something that looked almost like curiosity. And in the kitchen's roar, a fragile bridge began to form between a man who understood precision and a girl who had only known pain. Zira stared at the golden carrot as if it might bite her. The steam curled upward in lazy spirals, and the smell reached her nose, different from what she remembered. Not acrid, not aggressive, something almost gentle, like autumn leaves crisping underfoot. Theo did not push the plate closer. He simply set it on the counter between them and returned to his station, giving her space to decide. Around them, the kitchen continued its violent ballet. Knives struck cutting boards in rhythmic percussion. Flames roared from plasma burners. Someone shouted about a ruined reduction, and glass shattered near the dish station. But at Station 47, time moved slower. Theo pulled a small notebook from his apron pocket, its pages stained with oil and dotted with handwritten numbers. Temperature logs. He had kept them for years, tracking every batch, every adjustment, every lesson the fryer taught him. 340 wasn't a guess. It was a truth he had earned through burns and failures and late nights when his daughter's tuition was due and he could not afford to waste a single ingredient. He showed Zira the page, pointing to columns of numbers written in careful script. "See this? Every degree matters. 335, the batter absorbs too much oil. 345, the outside burns before the inside cooks. But 340?" He tapped the number with a scarred fingertip. 340 is honest. Zira's hand moved toward the plate, then stopped. Her fingers trembled above the golden carrot, and her breath came in short, shallow pulls. Theo watched her struggle and recognized the edge she stood on. He had stood on edges too. The edge of choosing between pride and his daughter's needs. The edge of staying in a kitchen that treated him like machinery. The edge of believing that small, precise work mattered in a galaxy that only celebrated spectacle. "You don't have to eat it," he said softly. "Just wanted you to see it's not what you think it is. Sometimes fear makes things bigger than they are." She looked up at him then, really looked, and her silver-rimmed eyes held a question she could not voice. Theo smiled, the tired smile of a father who had comforted countless nightmares. "My daughter's scared of doctors," he said. "White coats, needles, the whole thing. So I told her, Fear's just your brain trying to protect you from what hurt you before. But your brain doesn't always know when the danger's gone. He gestured to the fryer. This oil, it'll burn you if you're careless. But if you respect it, understand it, control it, it's just a tool, like anything else. Zira's hand descended slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of the plate. She lifted the tempura carrot, and Theo saw her arm shaking with the effort of fighting 3 years of conditioning. She brought it close to her lips, hesitated, then took the smallest bite imaginable. Her eyes widened. Not with fear this time, with surprise. The batter shattered delicately, light as paper. The carrot inside was tender, sweet, untouched by grease. It was nothing like the oily terror of her memories. It was nothing like torture. Theo saw tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, but she was smiling. And in that kitchen, surrounded by chaos and contempt, something impossible began. The kitchen's rhythm shifted like a tide turning. Master Chef Drevok stalked through the stations, his crystalline exoskeleton catching light in sharp, aggressive angles. He was Kirathi like Zira, but where her skin held the softness of youth, his had hardened into facets that reflected ambition and cruelty in equal measure. He ruled the summit's kitchens with an iron grip, and his contempt for human cooking was legendary. He had written treatises on the primitiveness of combustion-based cuisine, had given lectures on why humans would never transcend their limitations. And now he stopped at Station 47, his multifaceted eyes narrowing at the sight before him. The High Chancellor's daughter, standing in a service kitchen, eating something prepared by a human fryer. Drevok's mandibles clicked in a pattern that signaled disgust across 3 star systems. "What?" he hissed. "Is this?" Zira froze, the half-eaten tempura carrot still in her hand. Her moment of peace shattered like glass. Theo straightened slowly, positioning himself slightly between the girl and the master chef. "Just making a snack for someone who asked," he said evenly. His voice carried no challenge, no defiance, only the flatness of someone who had learned. That tone kept him employed. Drevok's laugh cut through the kitchen noise, sharp enough to turn heads at nearby stations. A snack, from burning oil and dead vegetables. He stepped closer, his height towering over Theo's frame. "You contaminate the High Chancellor's daughter with your crude combustion? Do you know what you've done, human?" Theo said nothing. He had learned silence was safer than defense. But Zira spoke, her voice small but steady. It wasn't crude. It was 340 degrees, exactly. Drevok's facets flashed with something between amusement and rage. Temperature, precision. How quaint. As if numbers could transform primitive technique into art. He seized the plate from Zira's hands, and she let out a small cry of protest. Drevok examined the remaining tempura with exaggerated scrutiny, then dropped it into the waste compactor with theatrical disdain. "The girl has a documented phobia of fried foods," he announced to the gathering crowd of kitchen staff. "And you, human, exploit her moment of weakness to peddle your greasy wares." Murmurs rippled through the watching chefs. Some nodded in agreement. Others simply watched, eager for spectacle. Theo felt the familiar weight of judgment settling on his shoulders, the same weight that had pressed on him since he arrived at the summit. Since he arrived on any station, any planet, anywhere humans were tolerated but never truly welcomed. "I didn't exploit anything," Theo said quietly. "She came to me scared. I showed her there's a difference between dangerous and controlled." Drevok's mandibles spread in what passed for a predatory smile. "Then, prove it. Prove your combustion is anything more than barbarism dressed in temperature readings. Cook for the high table tonight. Let the Chancellor and his court judge whether your primitive fire has merit." The challenge hung in the air like a blade. Around them, the kitchen staff whispered in clicking, hissing tongues. A human at the high table. It was unthinkable. It was humiliation waiting to happen. And Theo, looking at Zira's frightened face, knew he had no choice but to accept. Chancellor Vex Tar descended into the service kitchen with the gravity of a storm front. His robes, woven from threads that had witnessed the birth of 3 sons, swept the floor as he moved. His crown, a living thing of bioluminescent crystal, pulsed with the rhythm of his concern. He had searched every gallery, every corridor, every chamber of the summit for his daughter. And now he found her here, in the place where nobility never ventured, standing beside a human friar with tears drying on her cheeks and something like hope lighting her eyes. The kitchen fell silent. Every chef, every assistant, every station froze in mid-motion. The Chancellor's presence was law made flesh, and his anger could end careers with a whisper. Drevok stepped forward immediately, bowing low, his voice dripping with practiced deference. "Your Excellency, I discovered your daughter here, being fed unapproved food by this human. I have already challenged him to prove his methods at the high table tonight, where his inadequacy will be exposed before all." The Chancellor did not acknowledge Drevok. His eyes, ancient and weighted with the responsibility of billions, fixed on Zira. She did not cower. For the first time in 3 years, she met her father's gaze without shame. "I ate it, Father," she said. "I ate fried food, and I didn't get sick." The words landed like stones, in still water. Ripples spread through the watching crowd. Whispers kindled in a dozen languages. The girl who could not eat, who had embarrassed her father at state dinners across the galaxy, who had turned away from every master chef's attempts, had eaten something prepared by a human nobody. Vextar's expression remained unreadable, carved from the same stone that built empires. He turned his attention to Theo, who stood quietly beside his friar, hands still, posture neutral. "You are the one who fed my daughter?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Theo replied. The Chancellor moved closer, each step measured, until he stood directly before the human cook. The height difference was substantial. Vextar could have crushed Theo with a gesture, could have had him removed from not just the summit but from Kirathi space entirely. Instead, he did something unexpected. He looked at the friar, at the temperature gauge, at the notebook with its careful columns of numbers, at the tools hung with the precision of someone who respected their craft. "What temperature do you use?" Vextar asked. 340 degrees, Theo answered. "Always 340. The Chancellor's crown pulsed brighter, processing, calculating. He had studied at the finest academies, had learned the science of cuisine alongside the science of governance. He understood that precision at this level was not accident. It was mastery dressed in humility. "My daughter has refused food from chefs with 50 years of training," Vextar said slowly. "She has turned away from molecular gastronomy, from dishes that cost more than starships. Why did she accept yours?" Theo met the Chancellor's eyes and answered with the only truth he knew. "Because I wasn't trying to impress her, sir. I was trying to help her not be afraid." The kitchen held its breath, and Vextar, ruler of the Kirathi Dominion, nodded once. "Then you will cook at the high table tonight, not as punishment, as honor." The preparation chamber adjacent to the grand exhibition hall gleamed with equipment Theo had never touched. Molecular separators, quantum ovens, gravity-defying plating stations. But in the corner, at his insistence, they had installed his friar. The same scarred unit from Station 47, its temperature gauge familiar as his own heartbeat. He stood before it now, alone except for the weight of what was coming. In 3 hours, he would serve the high table. In 3 hours, every delegate who had ever dismissed humanity would judge whether his work deserved to exist in their galaxy. He pulled ingredients from the cooling unit, each one chosen with the care of a jeweler selecting stones. Vegetables from Earth, smuggled in his personal effects, because the summit's suppliers did not stock human crops. Zucchini, sweet potato, carrot, green beans, simple things that grew in soil and remembered sunlight. The batter he would make from scratch, the way his grandmother had taught him in a kitchen that smelled of her, perfume and flour dust. She had worked in a restaurant for 40 years, had never owned the place, had never been celebrated, but her tempura had made people weep with its lightness, its delicate crispness that dissolved on the tongue like snow. Theo measured flour with his hands, feeling the texture, knowing by touch when the ratio was right. He added ice water drop by drop, stirring with chopsticks in the lazy figure-8 pattern his grandmother had shown him when he was Zira's age. The batter had to stay cold, had to remain lumpy, imperfect, almost wrong-looking to achieve the right texture. Over-mixing made it tough. Under-mixing made it fall apart. The balance lived in feeling, in intuition earned through repetition. He thought of his daughter as he worked, thought of the video calls where she showed him her school projects, her face pixelated but smiling, thought of the birthday he had missed, the recital he had watched on delay, the goodnight kisses that came through screens, instead of in person. Every sacrifice had been for her future, for the education that would let her choose her life instead of having it chosen for her. The door opened softly. Zira entered, followed by her father. The Chancellor had changed from his ceremonial robes into something simpler, though no less regal. He carried himself differently now, less as a ruler, and more as a father trying to understand what had shifted in his daughter's heart. "May we watch?" Vextar asked. Theo nodded, unable to trust his voice. He returned to his work, slicing vegetables with a knife that had been sharpened so many times the blade had worn thin. Each cut precise, each piece the same thickness. Consistency mattered. In cooking, as in life, the small details determined whether something nourished or merely filled space. Zira moved closer, her fear replaced by curiosity. She watched Theo's hands move with quiet efficiency, watched him check the oil temperature for the dozenth time, watched him prepare, as if this were any other day at Station 47. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. Theo smiled, sad and honest. "I'm thinking about my daughter, and hoping I'm making her proud." The grand exhibition hall filled with delegates like a theater awaiting tragedy. Word had spread through the summit with the speed of scandal. A human would cook at the high table. A friar would stand where molecular architects had crafted edible nebulae. The galleries buzzed with anticipation sharpened by contempt. They came to witness humiliation, to confirm what they already believed. That humans were laborers, not artists. That Earth's cuisine was primitive fuel, not culture. That this human's temporary victory over a child's phobia meant nothing in the face of true galactic sophistication. Drevok held court in the Eastern Gallery, his crystalline form surrounded by admirers and sycophants. He had prepared a speech, carefully crafted phrases designed to destroy whatever the human presented. He would dissect the dish's crudeness, would compare its simplicity to the complex masterworks that preceded it, would use this moment to cement the hierarchy that kept humans in service corridors where they belonged. Already, delegates laughed at his preliminary jabs, at his description of combustion cooking as controlled barbarism. The mood was festive, cruel, eager. Theo entered through the service entrance, pushing a cart that held nothing but his fryer, his ingredients, and his tools. No anti-gravity displays, no holographic presentations, just a man, his equipment, and the silence that followed him like a shadow. He moved to the preparation station at the hall's center, beneath the great dome where light fractured into rainbows. Every eye tracked his movements, every tongue prepared its mockery. He did not acknowledge them. He simply began to work. He lit the fryer with hands that did not shake. He arranged his ingredients with the same careful precision he had used 10,000 times before. And he checked his thermometer, adjusting the flame until the oil reached exactly 340 degrees. The room's chatter dimmed slightly as delegates leaned forward, waiting for the spectacle to begin. Theo picked up his first vegetable, a slice of sweet potato cut paper-thin. He dipped it into the batter with chopsticks, let the excess drip away, then lowered it into the oil. The sizzle rose clear and bright, a sound as old as fire itself. He worked without hurry, frying piece after piece, each one emerging golden and delicate. No flourishes, no performance, just work elevated to its highest expression. The mockery began to falter. Delegates who had been sharpening their wit found themselves watching instead. The way he moved held a quality they recognized from their own masters. Economy of motion, perfect timing, absolute control. Drevok's mandibles clicked nervously. This was not going as planned. The human should have fumbled, should have burned something, should have given them ammunition for ridicule. Instead, he worked with the calm certainty of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Zira sat beside her father at the high table, her hands clasped tight with hope and fear. The Chancellor watched with the intensity of someone witnessing a truth he had not expected to encounter. And Theo, focused entirely on his work, completed the first plate. Simple, honest, perfect. He placed it before the Chancellor without ceremony. And the hall, for the first time that night, fell completely silent. Chancellor Vextar looked down at the plate before him. 5 pieces of tempura arranged without artifice. Sweet potato, zucchini, carrot, green bean, shrimp, each one golden, steam rising in delicate threads, no sauce drizzled in artistic patterns, no edible flowers, no molecular foam. Just fried food, prepared with precision that whispered rather than shouted. Around him, the high table held delegates from civilizations that had mastered cuisine centuries before Earth had discovered fire. They watched with expressions ranging from disdain to curiosity, waiting for the Chancellor's judgment to guide their own. Vextar lifted a piece of sweet potato with the ceremonial chopsticks used only for first tastings at the summit. The batter shattered at the slightest pressure, fragmenting into shards so delicate they seemed to dissolve before reaching his tongue. The sweet potato inside was tender, its natural sugars concentrated by heat that had touched it with surgical precision. No grease coated his palate, no heaviness lingered. It was light as a thought, clean as morning air. He set down the chopsticks and looked at Theo with eyes that had judged 1,000 meals and found most of them wanting. The temperature, Vextar said quietly. 340 degrees. Exactly. How did you know? Theo's answer came without hesitation. My grandmother taught me. She said every ingredient has a temperature where it becomes its best self. Too hot, you burn away what makes it special. Too cold, you don't transform it at all. 340 is where vegetables remember they came from, soil and sun. The Chancellor reached for another piece, then another. Each one spoke the same language of restraint and respect. This was not cuisine that demanded attention through complexity. It earned attention through honesty. Zira watched her father eat with an expression of desperate hope. She had seen him dismiss dishes that cost fortunes, had watched him politely endure banquets that bored him. But now his crown pulsed with a rhythm she recognized, the rhythm that meant he was thinking deeply, reconsidering assumptions he had held for years. At the Eastern Gallery, Drevok stood frozen, his prepared speech dying in his throat. This was not supposed to happen. The human was not supposed to succeed. But the silence in the hall was not the silence of mockery withheld. It was the silence of recognition. One by one, other delegates at the high table reached for the plates Theo had prepared, a Dorvathi senator, a Vex Etheri ambassador, a Quarian trade minister. Each one tasted, and each one fell quiet. They had expected to laugh. Instead, they found themselves confronting a truth they had dismissed. That mastery existed in forms they had not acknowledged. That precision could wear simple clothes. That a human working a fryer might understand something about cooking that their celebrated molecular architects had forgotten. The food was not trying to impress. It was trying to nourish. And in a galaxy drunk on spectacle, that simplicity struck like revelation. Vextar set down his chopsticks and spoke words that would echo through the summit for years. This human has shown us what we forgot. That cooking is not about dominating ingredients. It is about honoring them. The changes came slowly at first, then all at once, like dawn spreading across a dark planet. Within a week, the summit's curriculum expanded to include a seminar on precision temperature control in traditional cooking methods. Within a month, 3 human chefs received invitations to teach at the Kirathi Culinary Institute. Within a year, Earth was granted an advisory seat at the Galactic Culinary Council. Not out of pity, but out of recognition that mastery wore many faces. Theo Brennan became the first human to hold the title of Master Temperature Specialist. Though he declined the ceremonial robes, and kept his stained apron. Station 47 no longer sat in the forgotten corner of the service kitchen. It had been moved to a place of visibility, and young chefs from a dozen species came to watch Theo work, to learn the patience required to maintain 340 degrees, to understand that precision was not about technology but about respect. Some stayed for days, notebooks filling with observations. Others left after an hour, unable to reconcile their expectations with the humble reality of the work. Theo taught them all the same lesson. That temperature was not just science. It was conversation between cook and ingredient, a dialogue that required listening. Zira visited the kitchen twice a week, no longer afraid, no longer ashamed. She learned to check the thermometer, to feel when the oil was ready, to understand that fear lost its power when you understood what you were afraid of. Her father watched these visits with quiet gratitude, seeing his daughter reclaim a part of herself that had been lost. On her 12th birthday, Theo taught her to make tempura, guiding her hands as she lowered vegetables into oil that no longer terrified her. When she lifted her first perfect piece, golden and delicate, she cried with something beyond relief. She cried with the joy of transformation. Dravok remained at the summit, but his title had changed. He was no longer master chef. He was head archivist of traditional methods, tasked with documenting techniques the galaxy had nearly forgotten in its rush toward molecular innovation. The work humbled him in ways punishment never could. He spent his days in libraries instead of kitchens, reading texts written by species long extinct, learning that cooking was older than empires and would outlast them. Once, he found Theo in the archives, researching fermentation techniques from a colony world. They nodded to each other. Not friends. Not yet. But no longer enemies. Theo's daughter came to live at the summit when the restrictions on families were lifted. She was 9 now, older than when he had left, but still young enough to believe her father could do anything. He showed her the fryer, the thermometer, the notebook filled with temperatures and times. She asked if she could learn, and he said yes, knowing that what he was teaching her was more than cooking. He was teaching her that honest work, done with precision and care, mattered. That small things, repeated with devotion, built worlds. And in a kitchen where fear had ended, a father and daughter fried tempura at exactly 340 degrees, while the galaxy watched and learned what it meant to cook with love.